Welcome. I'm Faye Waterman, the conversation curator. This is a What's Your Superpowers podcast. My guest today is Bron Williams, and Bron is a strong advocate for women, dedicated to helping them reconnect with their inner power. Despite personal achievements, including an honours degree, serving as a school principal, being an ordained minister, and working with asylum seekers, societal and family expectations once hindered her potential. Now she actively challenges the norm. There's so much more to learn about you, Bron. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Faye.
And
lovely to be here.
Thank you. It's exciting to be having this conversation with you because I do know you from past, but you've been doing some amazing work out there. As you say, you're challenging the norms, whatever those norms are, and bringing them out so that people realise that they can challenge them too. So what you're giving them is that confidence and the ability to recognise them firstly, and then to have the confidence to go out and do what their purpose and passion are.
Indeed.
Share with us who you are firstly, and then sort of gradually come into how you got to where you are today and why you're so passionate about doing what you do.
Well, I think even that question, who are you? That actually, I believe, takes a lifetime to figure out, because as children, we are generally subject to the expectations of our parents, and we take on often the roles that we're assigned, and often by our birth order. Now, I'm the eldest in my family and was the longed for first child after 5 years of marriage and trying. So I think there was a weight of expectation placed on me quite unconsciously by my parents that I would be a particular way, because as the eldest in the family, and you sort of throw in the era of parenting, aka, Dr. What was his? Oh, Benjamin Spock. I was going to say Dr. Spock, and that sounds too much like Star Trek, but Dr. Benjamin Spock, who was the parenting guru of the 1950s. Who most of us now would go, oh no, please don't parent that way. And however, that was what my parents had, and as first-time parents, they took to heart so many of his words. And so you, as a person, are shaped so often by what parents expect of you, what they're hoping for, and particularly, I think, with my parents' generation, is self-awareness was not something that people particularly thought about. They came as people themselves in their childhoods, both of them lived through the Great Depression, then in their late teens, early 20s, Second World War. So, everything, their whole lives shaped around survival, literally around survival. And so the whole idea of being self-aware that my parents understood. And so I don't think they ever thought about how their decisions, how their behaviours would impact me or my siblings. That said, had a happy childhood, very normal for the 1950s and 1960s. And yet I know that I have had to do a lot of sorting through stuff, sorting through the messages, sorting through the narratives and stories that were placed on me and that I accepted as the norm. And it's only really been, I think, since my mid-40s that I've actually had the brain space to do this. Prior to that, raising a family, starting a career, and just all the things that go with those earlier years of life.
You tend to travel through life and do what you know and not question it at the time. But as you move through life and you experience different things and you see different things, it poses questions about, why? You ask yourself the questions, why you're doing that? What was it that instigated it? Where did that come from? And you challenge those things. And there are so many things that come out of asking those particular questions, Bron.
Absolutely. And as you're saying that, probably the most significant thing that I challenged was the whole concept of marriage and divorce. Coming from a conservative Christian upbringing that I then willingly took on as part of my own worldview, when my first husband and I were seeing the minister who was going to marry us, the only thing I remember, and I really do think the only thing that minister ever said to us was, don't get divorced.
Oh.
So, yeah. So no, this is how you should communicate with each other if you have an argument, none of that sort of thing. It was just, don't get divorced. And I certainly took that to heart. In your early 20s, divorce is the last thing on your mind. However, that settled very much into how I viewed the marriage, which was not an easy marriage for a long period of time. And yet I persevered because I believed it was the right thing to do. As a good Christian woman, I had needed to make this marriage work. And look, the marriage lasted 28 years and it would have gone on, except I couldn't do it anymore. And I had to challenge this concept that divorce was almost like the unforgivable sin. And I spent 4 years questioning. I even had a notebook. What does the Bible say about divorce? And of course, it's not black and white. There are a variety of different things. And I then had to weigh up which way was I going to go. And the thing that tipped me over into leaving was that I had been looking for a point in our marriage that I could go back to where everything was okay, everything was good. And I realised there actually wasn't one.
What was that point that you started to think about that? Why do I have to go back and find that point in my marriage where it was good so I can bring that back into the marriage when it was obviously not working for you? But at the same time, you knew that it wasn't the right place for you to be. But you had this quest pulling at you where getting divorced is not the done thing. It's not the right thing. And I know many older adults who lived in relationships that they could have left and been a lot happier, but you never got divorced. You lived for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health and all the rest of it. And that's not something that's done these days. I mean, people can get married. They're married for 12 months or 6 months and they've had enough, so they leave. But when you're brought up into societal, we'll call them norms, where your expectation is that you stay married regardless of what's going on in your marriage, doesn't do anything for anyone, does it?
Well, absolutely not. And because my husband ex-husband, and still is, his normal way of behaving is in a passive aggressive manner. Now, I had recognized that, but I hadn't really understood the impact that was having on me, because passive aggressive people are aggressive people. They just don't yell, shout, scream, throw things, hit you. The aggression is always subtle and covert, often disguised in humor. And so it's almost like you can't see it, and yet you still feel it, and you wonder, am I being too sensitive? Why can't I just brush off that joke? because there are no actual physical wounds, there are no bruises, you know, nothing's been thrown at your head, and yet the damage done in a passive aggressive relationship is as bad as physical violence, sometimes worse because you can't see it and it takes a long time to heal from. And even like I remarried last year, and Bill and I have been together now for nearly 6 years. And even in these last 6 years, little things have come up in our relationship. Not that there's an issue between us, but something that was happening reminded me of the way my ex-husband dealt with me. And it was only in they're often quite innocuous situations that I went, oh my goodness, had those aha moments. And insight is one of my superpowers. Having those aha moments where I went, oh, I remember when this happens, what's happening now reminds me of that. And often emotions are coming up and I'm getting teary and I realize, okay, I have been hurt by, and often it's humiliation, public humiliation done in humour. And that was certainly what this situation was about. Bill certainly wasn't doing that.
What you were saying there, Bron, was that when you realized that you weren't physically being abused or anything like that, and you said it takes a long time sometimes to heal. And I think emotional abuse is worse than physical because it's as bad as physical. Physical will heal because it might be a broken bone or a bruise or something like that. But the emotions, they go deep and you suppress all the things that are going on. And then it just gets more and more and more. And you don't realize it because you're in the situation until something outside you sees what's going on, and then you realize this. And emotional abuse or financial abuse, there's so many types of abuse out there. They're all damaging in one way or another. But for you to have the courage to step out of your marriage and move on in life and then remarry, but also in the relationship growing together as a couple and realizing sometimes there are things that are out of your control but remind you of situations that you'd experience that bring up that emotion. And that'll always be there, won't it?
Yes, it will. And what I see, because for me, as I said, right at the beginning, that getting to know ourselves, I believe, is a lifetime's journey. And so for me, when I have these aha moments, when I connect the dots with what is happening here that reminds me of something that's happened in my past, I am thankful. As much as I may feel sad or emotional or frustrated or angry in the moment, I am also glad that I now know what had actually been happening in the past, and that I've been able to recognize it and go, okay, I just then add that to the known experiences of my life, and that helps me understand myself better. And I think it's really helpful to not, like you mentioned about how we push our emotions down, but I think sometimes with emotional abuse, yes, I think we do push them down because it's just too many of them. But I also think it's so hard to see emotional abuse, particularly, as I said, when it's couched in humour. Oh, it was just a joke. Oh, you can't take a joke. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. All of those things, when it's actually really hard to see the abuse.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Your body is recording it, your emotions are recording it, even if cognitively you haven't actually figured it out yet.
Yeah. And I think that goes on a lot here today as well. So, Bron, you know, you've experienced those things in your life, and you said that there was a superpower there, recognizing and how to move through that. What is it that's brought you to where you are today, challenging those social norms? You know, the expectations of social norms is huge, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
But we live through it, but we don't actually think about it, because a lot of the time we conform to those societal expectations that we don't need to.
Absolutely.
How do we recognize that?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. And I was just, as you were asking this question, I'm thinking, gosh, how do I answer this one? And the thing that came to mind is that we just do it a step at a time. Like, after I left my marriage, I had this image of myself as a little frog on a rock in a pond, and all I needed to know was where the next rock was to get across the pond. I didn't actually need to even know where the edge of the pond was to get across, to the dry land. I only needed to know the next rock. And I think part of it is that just do the next thing, ask the next question, take the next step, because certainly at that time I didn't have any grand plans for my life. I was just trying to figure it out as I was going along. I was in uncharted territory, and I believe that has been how it's been as I've made other transitions in my life. Because one of the things that I did when I left my marriage was then I needed to find, I didn't have really strong employment. And then I joined the Salvation Army, and they asked me whether I'd like to be trained as a Salvation Army officer. So I did become an ordained minister. I did a degree and then an honours degree in theology. But that, again, was a step at a time. A step at a time. I'd moved out of one church where I'd been attending with my ex-husband, found the Salvos, they welcomed me, looked after me, and so it was just a step at a time. And then when I turned 60, you talk about challenging societal norms. At 60, you should be heading towards semi-retirement. But no, I decided, gosh, that's the time to start a business, didn't I? And I think that was probably during that period that we first met via Facebook and other things. And so I stepped into business, having absolutely no background in business at all, but just a step at a time, learning from this person, learning from that person, as I was able to, getting a coach so I could get some strategies in place. And so that's how I see it too, is just be happy to be the frog on the rock in the pond, moving from one place to the next. Because as much as we can have big goals, and I've certainly got some big goals for this last third of my life, but I can only do today that one thing that will take me closer to those goals. I can't actually make a huge leap into the future.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you have dreams and goals, and you set the goal up and you have an end date or a date that you'd like to achieve it, you have to chunk it down into step by step to get there, regardless of what it is. And that's life as well in general, isn't it? The realization of, I'm here today, where do I want to be? I have to take those steps to get there. They can be small steps or they can be bigger steps, depending on what it is that you want to achieve at the time and who's surrounding you to support you and help you. And you have stepped into an area coming from one church going into another church. What was that like for you to start with? Going into the Salvos, and they do great things for community and nationally and all that sort of thing, and you became an ordained minister. What was that like for you? And is that a superpower for you?
What was that like for me? There was a sense in which moving into ordained ministry was also the culmination of a goal. Because I am a communicator and I've got an education background, and because I have always loved reading the Bible, understanding it, I'd spent, decades doing that, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't something that I felt I had to do. However, so being given that opportunity was a wonderful thing, and also to do a degree, because I hadn't done a degree when I left high school. I'd had enough of study, even though my teachers at school suggested that I should go on to university, but I just went and did diploma training as a teacher. So, but I'd always had this idea I wanted to do a degree, and so here was this opportunity that by being part of the Salvation Army and their training program, I was able to do a degree at a quite reduced rate. So that was just absolutely fantastic. Interestingly, once I did become an ordained minister and I was in charge of a church in Canberra, the thing I discovered was, and this was a surprise to me, whereas going to church on a Sunday had always been my safe place, my community, place where I had friends, where I had support, because I was now the leader of the church, it was actually no longer a safe place, because I'd rock up there on a Sunday morning and everybody would want a piece of you. Every time, everybody who had a complaint, they would want to talk to you about, whatever it was, whether it was a complaint about somebody else. I'd get even tiny things like, can I use that milk in the fridge? And I'm going, just tiny things like that, along with the, the more difficult things that come with just a community, looking after a community of people. So that for me was a huge change, because what had for decades been my safe place was now no longer a safe place. And I still enjoyed being at church. I certainly enjoyed giving the weekly messages, basically doing a 20-minute keynote every week, 40 weeks a year, which is not then surprising that I've gone on to do professional speaking. But yeah, it was not a safe place, and I had to find safe people with whom I could open my heart, and they weren't going to be the people I would normally have done that with.
It's interesting, isn't it? So there was a challenge for you that was unexpected, but you overcame that by looking at avenues where you could find another safe space, because
Yes,
everyone was expecting something from you now, instead of you going to church and expecting something from the church itself.
absolutely.
And recognizing that and stepping up to the challenge of 40 weeks of giving, the message that was supposed to be given every Sunday or whenever to the people, but then also those people were challenged with things that they thought the church could help them with. A superpower for you is understanding and listening to those people and helping them recognize and solve the challenge that they have. But it was also a big learning for you to step onto the other side of what you were used to. And that challenge for you, you overcame and found those people that you could rely on to have your conversations and talk to them about what you were challenged with. So that's a superpower in itself, finding those other people, but working with the challenges of the people that came into, it's an expectation of them, really, that you're there and you know everything and you can answer it regardless of whether you can or you can't, or whether you can do something about it or not. It's an expectation, because it's interesting. You say you read the Bible and you read the Bible. Well, I'm in a group of which has been going for 4 years now, and we're going through all the history and everything like that, and the Bible comes into it. When I was a kid, I had to read the Bible. I had to go to church. I have just re-picked up the Bible and started to read it. And it's quite fascinating because when you look at it in a different perspective, you see something different.
Absolutely. And one of the things I loved about doing my theology degree was looking at the Bible from a different perspective. And so, understanding the historical context, understanding that the outlook of, say, people in the Old Testament who lived in a time when kings were despotic, they could literally put you to death, and that transference of how their real life king behaved towards them and how they transferred that onto their notion of God. And, the angry God of the Old Testament, which was really just a projection from their own lived experience. So even understanding those things, and then particularly in the New Testament, looking at some of the language, say particularly around homosexuality, and the church has often been quite anti the LGBTQI sector. However, when you read from a historical perspective, so the words of Paul, which are often quoted, he was referring to the sexual relationships between masters and their slaves, both male and female, so in which there was a power imbalance. So not talking about a loving, equal relationship between two people, but rather one of power disparity and people being used for sex to just satiate the needs, the gratification. So it's when you understand those, the historicity of the times, it actually deepens your appreciation for what was written, and it broadens your perspective on what has often seemed to be very narrow words.
And a lack of understanding, or the willingness to understand. And I mean, sometimes I think that religion used to be shoved down our throats and things like that. But now we have choices and we can choose. So there's a power in that. And with your understanding of the Old and the New Testaments and deeply going into it and doing the degree in theology, I find quite fascinating. A superpower is that you have an understanding of all that you can bring into what you do now.
Yes.
Where you're having conversations with people, or you're putting a program together, or you're running a networking event, or whatever it may be. There's something that you have that can, and I'm not sure how I want to say this, it will just come out, that you have this understanding of people, that they don't understand themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because those are the exact words I was going to use. Because as we understand ourselves better, we then are able to understand other people better. It doesn't mean we won't get frustrated with them or angry or any of those things, but because we've come to understand how much the narratives and the conditioning of our own lives has shaped our outlooks, we can then, with more compassion and empathy, look at, well, those people are acting out of, whatever narrative they have lived with for a long time. And I love being able, just how we tick, what makes us do what we do, is one of the joys for me in life. And I'm actually now extending that, in that I'm doing PhD research into the intersection of bias and shame. So, so again, a deeper look at how do we think, how do we feel, and why do why and how do these things intersect, and how does that impact our outlook on life and our behaviours? And I'll be in my 70s before I'm a doctor, but that's okay.
It doesn't
That's
matter.
one of the other things I'm challenging, is this whole thing about getting older.
Do you know, age is a number. It's not, I mean, our bodies do age, and gravity takes over and all that sort of stuff. But our mind can stay as young and as learned, if I can say that, as we want it to be. And I always say, you never stop learning until the day you die.
Absolutely.
And we don't want to live and get to the end of our life and say, if only. And if you're 70 when you finish that doctorate, so be it. But the thing is that you'll still be doing some of the things that you're doing to support and encourage. And I'm not really into the word empower, but empower.
Me neither.
Yeah, to give people the ability to understand that they have the magic and the brilliance to pursue their passion and their purpose, whatever age they are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's, you asked me what for a one-liner, and I find that really interesting that this has come up, because I have often said, I've been saying this probably from my mid-40s, I have no control over how long I've been on this earth, but I do have control over what goes on between my ears. And I don't know whether part of it was that I became a grandmother at 48 when my eldest son got married at 19 and was a father at 20. So that even then, and that was outside of my control, but even then I was a grandmother at a time where, like, probably 20 years before most people see as the norm, you become a grandparent in your 60s, and here I was in my late 40s. So I don't even know whether things like that also have unwittingly, unconsciously challenged what my life should look like. That's one word I think we need to eliminate from the English language, because there is no shoulds. You're quite right. Time and gravity have an impact on our bodies. And certainly, once I turned 60, my body started to say, you've lived a few years, haven't you? And, more and more, aches and pains. However, I describe this as my last third of life. And to me, this is going to be and is the time in which I'm doing my life's work, because it needed those previous 60 years for me to gain.
That's what it's meant to be. I mean, the third act of our lives is probably the best place to be, to learn, to grow, and share that knowledge and wisdom with people, because you've had the first and second act of life where you've learnt lots, done lots, been challenged lots, all those sorts of things. But the third act of your life is where now you have the ability to be able to go out and share it with the world.
Yeah, and connect the dots. That's one of the things that when I turned 60 and decided it was time to leave the salvos and do something of my own, was this sense of, gosh, 60 years is a lot of years. And yet I was still feeling quite young inside, still feel, and I still had quite a bit of physical energy, and I still do. So, but it's that sense of having lived long enough to be able to see the patterns of your lives. And I think that is so important that we do that. And I think one of the things that I want to be able to do, and as I talk with, particularly with women, is to help them start making those connections earlier. Don't wait until you're 60. If you've got the opportunity at 40 or 45 to start reflecting on your life, because you've got a bit of space, maybe your kids are older, all of those sorts of things where you're not sort of in so much the day-to-day running of other people's lives, and you've got a bit of space to do some reflecting, please do it. Because if you can start connecting those dots sooner, then you're making sense of your life earlier, and there's a sense of being able to shape the future in a different way.
But that's your gift to be giving to those younger people now, because you're in that space of being able to do it. So your superpower Another of your superpowers is you have the ability, the knowledge, the wisdom, the skills to take it to younger women,
Yes.
to give them the opportunity to grow and develop and do the things that they want to do at a younger age instead of getting into their third act of life and then starting it. I have to say, and I have to say this, it's bloody exciting. It is so exciting to be able to see how you can help others to achieve the things that have taken you 60 years to achieve. But now you have the opportunity to make it happen earlier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And create that ripple effect.
And that is exciting. And I'm seeing that this year particularly, I've been doing a number of leadership workshops for women, particularly for for companies who've been contracting me. But the feedback that I'm getting from the women who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s who are saying, oh, I hadn't looked at it like that before. Bron doesn't just, give us the five keys to leadership. We look at ourselves, we do self-reflection, we have lots of discussions. Because for me, the art of self-reflection is one of the most powerful tools that we have as human beings. It's a very ancient skill, but it is one, like some of us, and I believe I'm a naturally self-reflective person, but it is something that we can all learn to do. And it is so important because self-reflection helps us to cut through the self-deceit. We take a step back and look at ourselves and go, yeah, maybe not, about our behaviour or the way that we've been thinking, or we can congratulate ourselves. And I don't, you've mentioned earlier, we don't do this enough. We don't take a step back and congratulate ourselves enough. And I know I've started to do that because it's so easy to say, I haven't achieved this goal yet, without looking back and going, yeah, but have a look at how amazing I am, how much I've done. We must do that as well.
And that's why I do this podcast, because recognizing your superpowers, your magic and your brilliance is something that we as individuals need to reflect on, to have an appreciation for who we are and what we can do for others, because it brings out that confidence and that self-worth and that ability to be able to then recognize how well we can help others in their life.
Absolutely. It gives us confidence in what's coming out of our mouths, whether that's, as written content, verbal content, video, whatever it is. We can have confidence that what we're saying is of benefit and of value.
Because of the experiences and the challenges that you've had in the past, or we've had in the past, we can look and reflect on those and say, well, okay, I didn't do it so well then, but what did I learn from that I can take on to the next thing? Or what did I learn from it that I can teach to others so they don't keep reinventing the wheel? You don't reinvent the wheel, you just get on the wheel and you move forward. You don't go backwards, you move forward. And then those people create the ripple effect for others to do the same thing.
Very much so. And I think it's so important that we understand that all of us experience stuff. Shit happens.
It does.
It happens to all of us. And if it's going to happen to you, please learn from it. Because I think that is a key too. Because life does happen. We all have experiences that we much prefer did not happen. Some of them have been, we've generated ourselves. A lot of the times it's just circumstances around us over which we had no control. But the key is, if that stuff's going to happen to you anyway, learn from it. Grieve it if it needs grieving. challenge yourself, pick it apart, but take the lesson from it, because if it's going to happen, may as well get something out of it rather than just going, oh, woe is me, this has happened to me.
And I think when you get into a situation like that where you're being challenged, you can also look for the way around it. You look at the lesson that's being learnt. But the most important thing, I think, is to remove the emotion from the situation and really look at what's going on so that you can work through it or process it without the emotion, and you will get through it faster. It will be dealt with on a level of a better playing field, I suppose you could say. And the learnings can be huge that you can take on to the next thing. But we tend to, and I always say, when you're in a situation you're being really challenged, your emotions are high, your intelligence is low. And that's not saying that you're not an intelligent person. It's just that your emotions taken over and you don't think logically. And that's why you must remove that emotion and look at it logically to deal with it and move forward.
One of the skills that I've developed for myself when it comes to emotions in an emotionally charged situation is to actually sit with the emotion. This was something, it's not a skill that I somehow invented. It was something that was taught to me as I went through counselling, for my own issues, particularly around the divorce. That the counsellor would, when an emotion would arise, and often it was, sadness or frustration or anger, she would say to me, sit with that. And at first I didn't understand what she meant. But what it was don't push it aside too quickly. And one of the things that I've learned to do is to allow my emotions space to be what they are, and to give myself about a day to do that. Because when, if that's available, to allow myself to feel what I need to feel in this situation. If I'm angry about something, not necessarily lash out at something, but understand the anger. It's actually okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be sad. Sit with that, allow that. And what I've discovered is that when I do that, in a sense, when I honour the emotion that's arisen, it actually goes of its own accord and doesn't come back. And so, so there's that sense of, I honour that I feel this way, I give it space, allow it to leave of its own accord, and then my brain has the space to be able to then do the cognitive work it needs to do to figure out, well, what do I do next? What do I do now?
Yeah. And you need to sit in the emotion. It could be for a day, it could be for half a day, it could be for, if you're having a conversation with someone and it's getting a bit, topsy-turvy, you think, well, okay, I need some space now. I'm just going to walk away. I'll come back in a half an hour and work through the process there. Yes, you need to sit with the emotion for a certain period of time, but not sit in it forever, because
wallow.
Yeah, nothing gets resolved. So there's a certain amount of allowing and saying enough is enough. Now I have to deal with whatever it is.
I agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So tell us, Bron, the sort of things that you see when you're running a workshop, you're having a conversation, you're doing a group, where everyone's come together, they're having conversations, they're just connecting, and it's a lovely space to be in. What sort of things do you see happen within those environments?
I see people relating to each other. Well, someone will, make a comment or share their perspective, and you can almost see the lights go on in someone else who go, oh, they're like me. Oh, they've done, they've experienced this. And, it's not necessarily that the two situations are identical. It's just people can make a connection. between either how somebody handled something, how they felt in a situation. And I think this sense of normalizing our experiences, because so often we think we're the only ones who's ever experienced or ever felt a particular way, and yet in a group situation, and mostly, it's women who are in, all sorts of corporate situations. So they're talking about how they're relating with their team, how they're, relating with the people that they report to, all of those sorts of things, not necessarily talking about their own intimate personal things, but that being able to have a shared experience and go, oh, okay, I can see how that person handled it. And sometimes it's about giving advice of saying, oh, this is what I did in this situation. It's that sense of coming together at a level playing field, and then people being able to, in a sense, join the dots for themselves, understand how maybe their own personal narratives are playing out at work that are either helpful or not helpful. And one of the most amazing pieces of feedback I had from a recent workshop was, because I do share my story. I talk about my divorce. I talk about passive aggressive behaviour. I talk about my, my conservative upbringing. And a young woman came up to me. Now, she probably was only in her 30s and from an Asian background. And she said, today's session, I have got more out of this than 3 years of counselling, because I'm able to share my journey without the emotion, because the emotion's gone now, it's done, I've sorted that through. And she was, she has as an Asian woman, there are certain expectations around her, particularly expectations around marriage and divorce, and she had gone through that process. And so for her to hear someone else, particularly an older woman, I think, be able to share some of those things, it was this huge, oh, someone else has done this ahead of me, and look how they've turned out. They're okay. I'm going to be okay too. And they're the unexpected things. Like, that was not in my program. That was not in my workshop script. But these are often the unintended, unexpected things that I find women particularly get out of the workshops, because they join the dots for themselves, for their own lives.
And it's about the story. It's about the authenticity of the story and them being able to relate to it in their own life.
Yes.
And creating that realization of
Yes.
them being, wow, just that is incredible. Yeah.
It is. It's invaluable.
What else would you say about some of the things that you do when you go into a corporate organisation and you're working with a team who has a leader? What is it that you see the skills that they have, but you also see something else that is needed? What is that?
Again, I think it comes back to understanding each other. I think that's the thing that I bring with all the work that I do, is helping people understand themselves so that they can understand each other. And as we understand ourselves better, and we therefore can, have a deeper insight into other people, that then improves how we lead, how we manage, how we work together as a team, because we don't just then project onto other people. And I often talk about our biases, because we can very easily project a bias. We see someone who reminds us of somebody else, whether that's because of their behaviour or their gender or their skin colour or their accent, and we project that maybe not so positive situation onto this new situation. But when we start to understand, well, look, oh gosh, I've got biases, maybe I can then stop myself before I do that the next time. I can have an understanding just of how I think, and therefore I can examine how I then interact with other people. And that bears huge benefits in a team situation.
And it's also, it's creating the awareness, because they may not be aware of what they're doing. So you're creating that awareness so that they then have a choice.
Yes.
They have
Absolutely.
that choice.
Absolutely. And that, for me, is one of the drivers of the work that I do in the unconscious bias space, because our biases are generally hidden from us, but we can learn to become aware of them. And when we do, we then, as you so clearly said, we have a choice. Am I going to allow this bias to continue to influence my behavior? Or do I get a choice now? Oh gosh, I've got a new data point. I know something new about myself. What am I going to do with this? And we get a choice, and we can change our behaviors. We can change our outlook.
So much so. What would you say to the people that are listening? What advice would you give them, Bron, about awareness, about life, about social norms, being challenged by societal norms and things like that? Because I know this is an area that you specialize in and you help people with it. What sort of advice would you give them?
There's a couple of things I would say. The first thing is to be patient with yourself. You may see that there are things that need to change in your life. You'll become aware of things, but know that you will fall back into default ways of thinking and behaving because they've been in your life for so long. So as you're starting to make a journey out of, acting out of a particular narrative, or wanting to ensure that a particular bias is not impacting your life, be patient with yourself, because change is slow and change is incremental. We like it all to be magic, to have that genie rub the bottle 3 times, he gives us 3 wishes and everything happens. But that's not the reality of life. Change is slow. So be patient with yourself. And then the corollary of that is be patient with other people too, because often, they're doing a process as well. And the second thing is to trust yourself. And this is something which might seem strange at the, ripe old age of 68, that I'm actually just learning to do, which is to trust myself. But I'm understanding that because I've had such very strong narratives around what is right, what is wrong, what is accepted, and that they have played such a strong foundational part in my life, I have learnt to trust others, the voices of others. And it's only been in the last few years, and then even more deeply right at this current moment, learning to trust myself, trust what I call my intuitive genius, trust that what the words that come out of my mouth are of benefit, trust that my insight is accurate, trust that the ideas and the goals that I have and the ways, the methodology that I'm using is actually effective. So it's about trusting what is part of me, because all of the things that I've experienced, not only the foundational teachings that I had as a child, most of which I've actually rejected now because they don't work. The reality is they don't work, and they don't work for me. But to now trust, well, what is being generated in my heart, in my mind? What do I think? And to trust that and to act on it. So those are the 2 things. Be patient with yourself, but also trust yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bron. We've had an amazing conversation here. A broad spectrum of information and everything. And your superpowers are many. You create awareness. You teach people to look inside themselves, to have a better understanding of who they are, creating the awareness that they can change things and they have that choice, and being able to pursue the passion and purpose. You give them that opportunity to see that so that they can then go and pursue that for themselves. So building their confidence, their self-worth, their self-esteem, and all those things. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I have loved this conversation, and was never quite sure where it was going to go, but I love those sorts of conversations because you get to talk about things that are already there, but you're not, that bubble up, and it makes life interesting.
It does. And these conversations can take you anywhere at any time. So thank you, Bron, for coming on to
Pleasure.
What's Your Superpower, the podcast. I'm Faye Waterman, the conversation curator, and I'll be back again soon. Bye for now.